You're listening to Sweet Talk, all things maple.
Welcome back to Sweet Talk, all things maple. I'm your host, Aaron Whiteman, co-director of the Cornell Maple Program, recording today from the Arnott Teaching and Research Forest. Joining me is my colleague and co-host, Adam Wild. Hi, Adam.
Hello, Aaron. It's great to be back in the studio. How are things down at the Arnott Forest? Are you busy with different summer projects now?
Yeah, we're pretty busy this summer. Our big project is reconfiguring and resloping our main lines. And we're also doing some tree cutting and expanding our agroforestry research area. So lots of work in the woods. How about you? Do you have some good summer projects lined up?
Yes, we're also reworking some main lines and replacing some tubing in a section where we're going to have a logger thin out some of the poor performing trees or trees that are dying off. Although our biggest project this summer is testing different do-it-yourself methods to chill maple sap and concentrated sap to keep it from spoiling during the season.
Those sound like good projects. One of my favorite parts of maple is making improvements around the sugar house and working in the woods during the summer. But it seems like you and I have less and less time for that sort of work because of all the fast-paced changes in the maple industry.
Yeah, that's true, Aaron. 20 years ago, things were a lot different. But now there are all sorts of events relating to maple happening all year round. In fact, our listeners may be interested to know that we're already working on the January 2025 New York Maple Conference.
Yeah, that's right. We're working on that and other events. And sometimes it feels like there's so much going on in maple in so many different states and provinces that it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, I agree. But fortunately, there are some great media resources to keep up with everything that's happening in maple. One of those resources is a newspaper some of our readers may be familiar with, the Maple News. The Maple News comes out once a month and includes a variety of stories, including coverage of maple events, research updates, profiles of maple farms, and classified ads. It's well written, and I really enjoy reading it every month.
I really appreciate the Maple News too, Adam. And that's why, for this week's episode, I sat down with the man who started it all, Maple News founder, Peter Gregg.
I'm sure that was a really interesting discussion. I always enjoy chatting with Peter, so let's have a listen.
Welcome, listeners. We have a real treat for you today. I'm joined by someone many of you know, Mr. Peter Gregg from the Maple News. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you here. And for our guests who don't know you, can you start by introducing yourself and telling us about your role at the Maple News?
Yeah, so I'm Peter Gregg. Like you said, I think a lot of people know me. We've been publishing the Maple News for almost 25 years, and I'm the one who started it. And I'm the primary editor. We have a lot of contributors, yourself included, but for the most part, I'm the one running around the country covering the maple industry for both the print edition, which is still going strong, almost 25 years later, and also our web edition, which is gets many, many views per month. So we try to just keep in touch with everything going on in the industry from month to month.
Wow, 25 years? I had no idea the publication had been around that long. Has it always been in kind of its current incarnation, or did it start as something a little different?
No, it's pretty much been the same, from the get-go. It's gotten bigger, more pages and certainly more subscribers, but it's pretty much the same. Actually, I take that back. It started out in black and white. We used to print in black. That's how long ago it was. It was only in black and white. We turned to color in I think 2011 or 2012, we started printing in color. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but yeah, anyway. And then, and it's still going very strong as we speak. In fact, we're at, the highest subscriber level we've ever been at. And it just keeps doing well, keeps thriving. So a lot of the newspaper industry in America has really gone down. The daily newspapers have really struggled, for example. But trade magazines, trade newspapers like the Maple News have done very well and continue to, especially in our demographic. People like to have the newspaper in the sugar house with them, or they like to have it it comes and it sits on the kitchen table. People like having the physical copy in their hands. And the other kind of thing is a large percentage of our subscribers are Amish and Mennonite and so on. And this is their primary source of information, is our print publication. So there you go.
So if people want to subscribe, do they just go online if they have the internet and look up the Maple News and get a subscription? Or are there other ways to subscribe?
Yep, that's the best way. Yep, themaplenews.com, and there's a little, click through and we'll start sending it to you every month.
Wonderful. Well, we love the Maple News. We're regular readers. We should probably contribute more. We try the best we can. Don't always have time to write articles, but we'll be in there in the future, hopefully, if you'll have us.
You're always a hit when you do, Aaron. You're a very good writer. And we always love it when you give us stuff to print. And the research that you're doing in the Cornell Maple program, you and Adam and Ailis and the others, Catherine, right? So the stuff you're doing there, to me, in my mind, is just so forward thinking and innovative and fun, too. I mean, you're coming up with fun new ways to use maple that no one would have ever thought of before. And, to me, I think it's really useful for the industry as a whole. So giving you a little applause back.
Well, thanks for that. And I don't know what we'd do without you. I think we reach so many people with our research through the Maple News. So we appreciate that a great deal too.
Yeah, I mean, that's been that's the great thing about our industry overall is the sharing of information, So, I mean, you guys, you're in New York, but you are just free with distributing your information all across the Maple Belt from Minnesota to Maine and everywhere in between. And you have no problem with that information going out to everybody, all the Maple states. UVM and the Proctor Center, they do the same thing, and you guys travel all over the country doing speeches and seminars and so on, and sharing all this great research that you're doing with the industry at large, not just the New Yorkers. And that's what we do in Maple. We share information with each other. We're all technically, I guess we're kind of competitors, but for the most part, go to any Maple show, talk to any other Maple producer. I mean, we're swapping stories and swapping ideas left and right on how to do things better. And that's one of my favorite things about being part of this industry is all the sharing of information. And fortunately for me, I also share information and people have no problem with letting their trade secrets out to everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's a great part of Maple. And speaking of sharing, before we get too deep into other topics, rumor has it you have a book set for release this summer. And I understand it's about Maple. Can you tell us a little bit about your book? Give us a little sneak preview.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, well, I got to plug my book. It's coming out on July 2nd. It's called The Sugar Rush, and it'll be in bookstores all across the country, Amazon, Target, Walmart. Everybody will have it. And it's a Maple book, but it's a Maple memoir. So it's not like a procedural on how to make maple syrup. It's a story. It's a narrative about my experience making maple syrup. Poorly a lot of times. It's a comedy in a lot of ways. All right. So it's a lot of things go wrong. And, it's really kind of a chronicle of my 2022 maple season. So I make maple syrup too. I don't just publish the Maple News. I make syrup too. And I have even longer than I've been publishing the paper, I've been making syrup. And our sugar house is in Hebron, New York. It's right on the New York-Vermont border. In fact, the Vermont state line runs right through our woods. But I'm a writer. I'm not a farmer necessarily. I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I'm not mechanically inclined at all, hardly, Aaron. I had to change a flat tire once. But other than that, my experience, making maples and being mechanical and using all this equipment that we use in this industry, I am a complete novice to it all. I mean, I never even handled a chainsaw until I was like in my 40s. And all the technology that we're using now in Maple, RO machines and vacuum pumps and so on and so forth, I had no inkling, no experience with any of that. And I've had to learn it all, again, as a writer, not as a farmer. So a lot of things go wrong. And that's what I chronicle in the book. And then I write a lot about all the cast of characters that are in my kind of Maple corridor of Hebron, New York, Salem, New York, Rupert, Vermont, West Rupert, Vermont. There's like 4 or 5 really just wonderful sugar makers who have been doing it all their lives and who are very mechanically inclined, who are excellent sugar makers that, come around to help me out. And it's just a lot of fun. And then the other kind of aspect to it is I have my best friend. He's a buddy who's been helping me out for many years. And, he's kind of my partner in crime, so to speak. So And there's just a lot of humorous conversations, especially when things break or when things fail. And it's all also, Aaron, it's all about my kind of attempt to become like the big guys, all right? So it's really the driving part of the narrative is me trying to become a 5-pounder. So we know what 5-pounders are, right? So making 5 pounds of syrup per tap. And so that has been an ambition of mine, and I've never quite achieved it. And in 2022, I really just threw down the gauntlet. And I kind of talked to my buddy, his name is Bert in the book. It's an alias. He wants to kind of stay private, but I kind of lay it down to Bert. I said, man, I'm tired of getting kicked around by these trees. I want this year to be the year that we make 5 pounds per tap. Like all the guys up in, Northern New York, the Cornell Research Center, both, I'm sure you and Adam are both making 5 pounds per tap or more. And all the big Vermonters and all these guys that I talk to. And I want to be like you guys, I want to try to do this. And the best we had done prior to that season, again, I'm chronicling the 2022 season, is maybe 3.5 pounds per tap. I mean, I don't know. We almost have to double our production to kind of achieve this goal. And so it's going to take twice as much work on my part and just an obsessive kind of drive to get there. And that's kind of the driving part of the narrative of the book, The Sugar Rush. So it's going to be a little different than you kind of, read things I've written in the Maple News over the years. So again, it's filled with like humor, profanity, so people are going to have to get used to hearing that. But when things break around the farm, I felt I needed to be true and authentic to how we react to those kind of problems.
Yeah, sometimes those
profanity.
Sometimes those 4-letter incantations have some powerful magic to make things working again, right?
You nailed it. Absolutely, Aaron. Yeah. So that's all in there. So I should put like a parental advisory sticker on the cover of the book. Okay. Because a lot of people aren't going to be used to seeing that kind of language, from me, but I felt I needed to be authentic to the book. So it's in there. But again, it's all part of, it's fun. And I try at the same time also just really kind of, let the world know about what we're doing as an industry. I kind of wrote it for people almost outside of Maple in a lot of respects. So people that live in New York City or Los Angeles or St. Louis or England about what it's like to make syrup in these woods and what we go through to get there.
So the book is called The Sugar Rush?
It is called The Sugar Rush, yes.
And where is it available, or when will it be available?
So it releases on July 2nd, and it's going to be available in bookstores nationwide and also online at anywhere you buy books. So Amazon, Target, Walmart, etc. There's a variety of different places. Barnes & Noble, Simon & Schuster is probably a good place to start. And then at your local bookstore, of course.
Great. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. It sounds like a great story. And this is exactly why we wanted you on the show, Peter. This podcast, we focus often on research, and we rarely get to the storytelling part of Maple. But Maple, as you know, in many ways, it's a human cultural enterprise, right? It's driven by social values and individual motivations. And as individual sugar makers, we all have a story to tell. And that story is often how we got started, what Maple means to us on a personal level, et cetera, and things like that. So for you, Peter, clearly that takes on a whole new dimension because part of your Maple business is storytelling. So it seems natural here to begin the interview with your Maple story. So can we rewind to the beginning, 25 plus years ago, and have you tell us what got you interested in sugar making and how you got started?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, like I said, I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, so I didn't even know what real maple syrup was. I was an Aunt Jemima man. Up until I shouldn't even admit it, but in public, but it's true. So what I ended up doing, I went to college in Vermont, and that was my first time really to be exposed to real maple syrup and kind of fell in love with it. And then I became a newspaper reporter for a daily newspaper in Vermont. And part of my coverage was agriculture and maple, and got to know it even more. So that's kind of how my introduction to maple, and what switched me off the fake stuff, so to speak, was, just moving to Vermont and just becoming exposed to it there. So that's the eating part of it. Okay. But then the making part of it, well, so I worked in I had this kind of boring office job for a while. And this dude in the office who worked there, he made maple syrup, and he'd bring his syrup in and kind of share it with everybody in mason jars and pass it around the office, and everyone would go nuts for it. They'd say, this is the greatest stuff ever. And I was like, what is, I kind of really wasn't still that familiar with it at the time, but, and I was like, it's pretty cool how they're reacting to it. And this dude, his name was Dudley. And Dudley said, hey, you want to come boil with me this Saturday? And I was like, boil? What are you boiling? He's like, the sap. Where do you think the syrup comes from? I was like, well, sure. I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting myself into, so I went there on this Saturday morning. He had this hobby farm, and he had buckets hanging on trees all around his kind of little property. He had probably 40, 50 buckets. And we just drove around in an orchard tractor collecting the sap. And then he had an evaporator set up in his chicken coop, in this old evaporator. And so we fire it up and we start boiling, and we're rolling along, and it kind of evolved into a party. All right. So he brought out some 6-packs and we had some guitars, and it was just one of those beautiful spring days that we all know what those days are like when the sun's out and it's like 55, just awesome. We're playing our guitars and drinking a few beers, and then he wanted to partake a little bit further, and he goes into the house and comes back out with this substance that is now legal in New York, but it wasn't legal at the time. But and he offered me this particular substance, and I said, I'm kind of good with the beers, but he partook in a big way. And so Dudley, in the meanwhile, the sap's boiling at, it's just boiling, roaring boil in this chicken coop, and he starts to fade pretty quick. He's, oh boy, I think I overdid it. I gotta go take a nap. I'm like, okay. He's like, you just watch the rig for a while, and then when the dial hits 7, draw off. I'm like, okay. And he goes in the house, and it was as if he asked me to land a plane. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what to do, Aaron. And so I just kept firing the evaporator. I'm staring at the dial, and me and you both know what the 7 on the dial means, of course, right? But me, I did not. And I'm like, holy crap. Okay. So I'm staring at this dial apt, like trying to watch like a chicken hatch out of an egg. I was just, watching. And finally it hit 7, and he had this like old milking pail set up underneath the draw spout. And I was like, all right. So I filled the bucket, just hit the thing and filled the bucket. It was like a 2.5 gallon pail, I guess it was. And I was like, all right. And then the dial went back down to like 3, I guess it was. But then sure enough, it fired back up again to 7. You know how that goes. You can draw off on these old rigs, you draw off, and then you get another draw right away after. So now I'm running around the chicken coop trying to find another pail. And I filled that one. And then and it's like, all right, and then it went way down the dial after that. Well, then not too long after, Dudley comes back out with like some roast beef sandwiches. He's going to recover from his nap or whatever, and kind of looks at the pails like, well, let's see how you did, and he kind of dunked his finger in there and took a little sip, and he's like, oh, it's not too bad, a little thin, but not too bad. And then he brought out, a hydrometer cup, one of the copper, hydrometer cup is copper, I remember. And he dropped the hydrometer in it, and it was just clanked right on the bottom. It was super thin, Aaron. All right, so you know how this goes. But, he said, he was cool about it. He's like, it still tastes good, And then, so then the rest of the afternoon, he kind of let me just run the rig, and he kind of taught me some more about, the density, how to do it properly. And after the afternoon progressed, I started to get a little bit better at it. And it was like, oh man, is this awesome? This is so cool, and that was my first time making syrup, and I just fell in love with it right then and there, and then the next Monday he comes back into the, we're both in the office, and he walks into my office and he's clutching the hydrometer cup and he clanks it down on my desk, and he's like, this is for you. He said, you make maple syrup once, you're going to want to make it the rest of your life. He said, we call it the bug. And, you make it once and you're hooked. And he was right. He also had a couple of old sap buckets with him, and he gave me those, and he just said, why don't you try this at home? And so that's what I did. I started doing it at home and, tapped the trees in the backyard. We lived on the edge of a cemetery, actually. It had a bunch of cemetery maples, which are juicy. Really juicy. Anybody who lives near a cemetery knows they're big open trees, And I started tapping those over the years and set up my first rig on a pair of cinder, some cinder blocks in the wash tub, like so many guys have done. Then the addiction just really took hold, right? I mean, I started buying land and built a sugar house, then built another sugar house, and then it just, the bug progressed and progressed and progressed some more. And 25 years later, I'm trying to be a 5-pounder, So here we are. That's my story.
I was going to say that's not the most orthodox story about how you got into maple. A little bit of adventure there in the beginning, but yes. I guess there really isn't an orthodox story. All of us, people come at this from so many different angles with so many levels, different levels of experience. I'm sure that's part of what makes it interesting to you as a reporter, is all these different perspectives you get along the way.
For sure, Aaron. I mean, over my career, I must have been in 1,000 different sugar houses. And, the great thing about our industry is we have 1,000 different ways of making the exact same thing. Everybody has a way to build a better mousetrap, so to speak, and it's always fun. It's every time I visit somewhere, I learn something new. And that's one of the fascinating things about maple in general, is that we'll never have it figured out. I mean, you hear Cornell University, the premier university in the country, you guys don't have it figured out necessarily, do you? I mean,
not even close.
Right. You never will. You probably either. I mean, you think about, just how much research just into the trees. To me, the trees are in a lot of ways unknowable. We have a good idea, but can you or anyone really tell me the absolute scientific reason as to why in February, March, and April, why these trees and why just maples in general are sending sugar up their trunks?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
right.
I don't know. I don't know if there's a definite answer. Is there? I mean, I don't think anyone knows for sure.
Right. I think in maple, there are lots of gaps in our knowledge and things that we're learning that we thought we understood that we didn't fully. And there's always room for improvement, which I think is really fascinating for us. It's also job security for us as researchers. Thank goodness. There's still questions to ask. But one thing that Adam and I try to communicate to the maple syrup industry is that, we're specialists, but we appreciate expertise from all quarters. Experience is expertise a lot of times. And you're in a unique position as a reporter of traveling around a lot. How many miles do you put on a year just going to events and sugar houses? Do you have any idea?
At least 50.
I see you everywhere.
Yes.
50,000 miles a year?
At least, yeah. For sure. Yep. It's upwards. I put a lot of miles on my truck and my regular personal vehicle, just anywhere, just driving around, flying around. Yes, it's a lot of coverage.
Do you have any idea how many sugar houses you've been to at this point?
Like I said, I'm sure it's more than 1,000. I haven't really counted, but it's in that neighborhood, I would say. And like I said, every one of them is unique. And every one of them, to me, is fascinating. And I just feel so comfortable in sugar houses. It's a great place to be. And they're always just, I don't know, they fascinate me. And that was part of the allure of maple in general. And it's one of the reasons why I got hooked on it so easily. It's so authentic and just cool. And, just connections with nature and trees, which I've always loved. And I've always been outdoors. Even though I grew up in the suburbs, I've always just been drawn to the outdoors. And it's been a big part of my life. And that's why I've taken to maple so much, And I think just in general, too, just, part of my progression as a sugar maker has been kind of the progression of the industry in a way. When I started off on galvanized sap buckets in the backyard, those are all gone now, but I went from buckets to tubing. And then I went from gravity to vacuum. And then I went from just like a milk pump vacuum, all those dairy vacuums that, those old Surge 22s that you see a lot of folks use, to high vacuum. I went from, 3/16 to 5/16 from going, here's a big one, no RO to an RO. That is a big, big progression. That's so many sugar makers, a big step that they make, and I've made all those too. And then part of the difference for me is that I've kind of publicly chronicled all of those transitions and the things that have gone wrong and gone right about that.
Well, 25 years and over 1,000 sugar houses is a really great perspective to reflect upon. And I think I want to talk about all the changes you've observed over the years, but first kind of backing up a little bit. When you walk into a new sugar house, Because not a lot of people visit a ton of sugar houses. I think a lot of people are only familiar with their own and maybe a handful that they've seen. What kind of things do you find most interesting? Or what are some of the things you've learned by visiting other people's sugar houses, if you have a few examples?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the trend now is the modern sugar house, to me now, the ones that are being built within the past, 3 to 5 years or currently,
Mhm.
all have white washable walls. Most of them have stainless pipe. Most of them have like a garage door as opposed to the old board and batten. They're pole barn style, the kind of the metal prefab style kind of sugar houses. They're efficient and clean, and we're making food, and so people are just precise, and precision is involved in setting up a sugar house so you can make syrup with absolute efficiency and cleanliness and room to move around and room to add equipment. So that's another, I guess maybe the biggest thing for me is, when I started building my first sugar house and also my second sugar house, I've built two with my own hands. And in both times, everyone told me, try to figure out how big of a sugar house you're going to need and then double it. My problem is
Yep.
I didn't listen, but my sugar house is pretty tight, but I've added on a lot. But what I have noticed in the industry is there's a big difference between Midwest sugar houses and Northeast and New England sugar houses. The Midwest sugar houses are, in most cases that I've seen, those Morton style, let's call it, type buildings, metal with white washable walls. I mean, maybe it's because they're so tied to the dairy industry, and Wisconsin is kind of what really comes to mind, our fourth biggest maple producing state. You really see it there, just white walls, washable, stainless steel pipe everywhere, just, spectacular, gorgeous sugar houses out there. And with big garage door opening bays, and it just
Right.
really super efficient and clean and beautiful, and they get inspected a lot out there. So in Wisconsin, sugar houses, every single sugar house in the state gets inspected every year. So they really go out of their way to make their sugar houses beautiful. And then in the Northeast, you find the more rustic ones. And those I love visiting. And that always just it's just such a wonderful feeling to walk into a sugar house, the old board and batten, post and beam, board and batten, rough cut lumber sugar house, which is what mine is actually, with, an evaporator with open pans. I love seeing open pans, Aaron. I want to see the steam. I want to smell the sugar house. I want to, all those sensories, I just want to be hit at once when you walk into a sugar house. And so those old school sugar houses that you see in the Catskills around by you in the southern tier and up and through New England. I mean, I just love those kind of sugar houses. And those are also the most popular with tourists for the agritourism weekends and whatnot,
Right.
Open house weekends. So yeah, that's
Classic maple.
classic. Exactly, Aaron.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting to me, as a teacher of maple, is that there are certain things that are really hard to teach. I mean, maple's simple, but it's complex. And one of them is just sugar house setup. And I still learn this when I go to other people's sugar houses, and maybe you've had this experience, is just little intricacies of where do you position the tanks? How do you direct the sap into the building? How do you pipe it to the different machines? How do you set it up so you can clean it and drain it? Things like that I think when we're just kind of imagining a sugar house, if we're about to build and we don't think of those little nuances. Are those the type of things that you, over the years, have learned to see in sugar houses?
For sure. Oh, yes. And I think that is all trial and error. And again, every sugar house is different and they kind of set themselves up, but technology is definitely helping us in that regard. Yeah, sugar house setup. There used to be a pretty common denominator there. In fact, Cornell University and the University of Vermont used to put out these blueprints that are still available. In fact, we have some old copies laying around of the most efficient way to set up your sugar house. But that, they were set up for when people were on buckets and they were hauling sap around the woods and horses with horse-drawn sleighs and things like that. And things are a lot different now. I guess there's a little bit of uniqueness to every sugar house. The manufacturers are coming up with so much more efficiencies for cleaning. I was up at the Leader Open House, the Leader H2O Open House not too long ago. And they got their evaporators, they have set up on little hydraulic kind of like so you hit a button and then you can tilt the entire evaporator. So you can tilt it to the left or the right to help drain the pans after you're washing them. They got them set
No
up in these
kidding.
little hydraulic cushions that are underneath the rig, and you hit this little button, the entire setup, the arch of the pans, huge 6x16 evaporators or 4x14s.
Wow.
I can't remember what they were. The Wendells actually were showing it to me from Western New York, but he hits this button and the whole evaporator tilts 10 degrees to the left, so you can easily drain the pans, things like that. CDL has their auto washers for their back pans and whatnot. The manufacturers are really coming up with some really clever and useful equipment improvements to help us be most efficient in the sugar house, I've noticed.
Yeah, I missed that tilting evaporator, and I was there. I'll have to learn more about that. But let's focus on that for a minute, the changes that you've seen over the years, because as you know, being in this for a while, and I've been in this for quite a while, things have changed dramatically in the past 25 years especially. What's your perspective on change in the industry? Do you see any interesting trends with the people that are involved? I mean, obviously there are a lot of changes in the equipment, and I think overall that kind of changes the character of the enterprise. What are your reflections on that?
Yeah, when I got started, most people, there was quite a few people in tubing, of course, but there were so many buckets out there. I remember driving around like Lewis County, for example, up in the northern part of the state. I remember driving around Lewis County in 2001, 2002, and there were just buckets everywhere, galvanized buckets on every road, everywhere you looked, all over the county, everywhere. It's not like that now. So most people don't use buckets anymore. Almost everybody's on tubing, and that development, is a big one. And then ROs and high vacuum. The two big technologies, of course, high vacuum and high concentrate. Those are the two huge developments that I've seen really since 2008. To me, 2008 was the kind of the tipping point year when everything changed. If you recall, 2008 was a really short crop and a really short season, but consumer demand was through the roof. It was still very, very strong, and there was a huge shortage. And the packers are paying like $4 a pound for syrup. In 2008, 2009, there was a big shortage, if you recall. And so when bulk syrup prices hit $4 a pound, and that was 2008, 2009, 2010. You can look it up. It's hard to believe now when we're at like 210, but it was almost double the amount then, believe it or not. That kind of launched the arms race, and that kind of coincided with the technology boom that we've seen in RO technology for sure, and then high vacuum technology. So no one was talking about high vacuum. People were talking about vacuum, but people were real excited if they were getting 15 somewhere in there, or maybe 20. Now most sugar makers are, if they're really, really going for it, they're at 28, they're 27 inches of vacuum. But that whole revolution, and let's call it a revolution, Aaron, because that's what it was, this combination of high vacuum technology and efficiency in the woods. People said, let's focus on the woods instead of the sugar house. And they went into the woods and started leak checking like crazy. And then the monitoring came along kind of maybe 10, 12 years ago. It also helped with the leak checking and just the highest efficiency of vacuum. It used to, when ROs were really kind of getting started, that goes all the way back to like the early 80s. Even. People were using ROs back then, but they were running their concentrate to 8% and just jumping up and down with joy. Now it's more common to be 16, 20, 24. And then the high concentrate folks, they're using, they're 35% concentrate, and using these enormous flat pans, and now the biggest revolution I've seen in the past 2 years is all the big producers are switching to steam. So but it's so concentrated, this revolution, this technology boom. It's been so concentrated over the past, let's say 12 to 15 years. We had 200 years of sugaring almost the same exact way. And in the past 15, just this explosion of technology. And if you had told a sugar maker back in the 50s the things we're doing now, and the efficiencies that we have, and the amount of syrup that we're making per tap, they would have just blown their mind. So it's exciting to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point because There are definitely some trade-offs in there for sure. I mean, we're definitely making more syrup, but as you said, there's this move towards steam with the big sugar houses, and a lot of people are saying, "Oh, now I need to tap 100,000 trees to be a viable business." But there's still those small family businesses that persist, and a lot of them, and a lot of hobbyists. So, how do you speak to those different audiences through your reporting? Do you try to address those different audiences, or are you trying to put out generally interesting stories, or do you think there's different things that different people are looking for?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I try to cater to both audiences for sure, and they all subscribe to the paper. So I love those 100,000 tap guys or the 50,000 tap guys. I mean that those producers, those men and women who are trying to get 7 or 8 pounds of tap per season, and they're just going for it and just killing themselves, going up and down their mountains, chasing leaks and whatnot or whatever. But I just have so much respect for that. It taps into kind of my competitive nature a little bit. It's almost like keeping score. It's almost like a sport and that kind of thing. And I love writing about that and just, hearing about that and being a part of that. But also, I love the small hobbies, family guys, because that's how I am. I got 1,200 taps, not even. So that's my realm, that's my world. And I boil on open pans and I fire with wood. And then I bring most of my syrup to Bascom's in drums just because I don't want to retail syrup necessarily and compete against my neighbors who also subscribe to my paper. All right. so I kind of just try to stay neutral and I just bulk my syrup. But I've retailed some syrup before and I love that. And to me, it's, the 5,000 tap or less folks. Those are the people that I think they're innovating in different ways. They're innovating in products, in value-added products. And that's where the Cornell Maple program, where you get all the exciting stuff that you guys are doing and all those awesome products that you're coming out with and will continue to come out with, I'm sure. But those value-added products, I just love seeing that. And I think that's how you make money in maple, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I see so much of that, especially over the past 5 years. I've seen that's another revolution that maybe we don't talk about as much because the technology is so exciting and that's what we all get enthralled with or whatever. But there's another revolution that I've noticed, and that is how much people are getting into value-added products and the kind of products that they're coming up with. The creativity that's going into the use of maple in value-added products, is just really exciting to see there. And those are the 5,000 tap or less people. Those are the people that are doing those kind of things. They're the ones that are going to the farmer's market, and they're the ones that are, with all their different maple creams and their bourbon barrel syrups and their maple cotton candies and their maple coated nuts. I love, which is my personal favorite, actually. Those are the people that are going to the fairs and the festivals and the craft shows and the farmers markets and so on, and online also selling their products there. That's a whole nother revolution that to me, I've noticed has really boomed. And just almost since COVID, when the bulk price really kind of just went down in like the late 2010, like 2017, 18, 19, and people said, I can't make money. I got to figure out a different way to make money. And so they turned to value added, and they're having so much success doing that. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation because a lot of times as sugar makers, we think about what turns into drudgery sometimes of the spring, that's the hard work of maples. We're out there in the woods, leak checking, trudging through the snow, staying up late in the sugar house. But really the work that pays off is the work in the marketplace, right? And that's work that sometimes goes on all year round. So I think you're exactly right that is a big revolution that we're seeing is in the number of products that we're selling. And I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg on that. And I'm sure you probably see at least as many innovations as we do in terms of beverages, health supplements, bath beauty products, you name it, you can make it with maple. So that's something that's really interesting to us as well.
Yeah, that's all my favorite stuff to sample. Also, I mean,
Right.
I've had so much maple syrup, and every sugar house I visit, everyone is just very gracious about, try my syrup. And it's always good, especially when it's right. When I visit people during the season, and whenever I visit a sugar house, I make a point of buying something while I'm there. I'll buy a quart of syrup or whatever they have, in the setup in their sugar house for sale. I always, whenever I make a sugar house visit, I buy. They subscribe to the Maple News. I buy a product from them. And a lot of people try to just give it to me and I wave them off. I'm like, no, 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 I am paying you. But my favorite things to buy in the sugar house are the unique things that they're making. Maple coated nuts, that's a big one. I mean, the maple coated nuts, so easy to make and so profitable, and to me, so delicious. Maple creams, the maple candies, bourbon barrel, all the infused syrups, and then all the stuff you just mentioned that you're doing there at Cornell. Adding value, that's how you make money when you're on a smaller scale. And then the other successful people that I've noticed are the ones that are frugal in the woods, frugal in the sugar house, making do with what they can, and then just working as hard as possible to become as efficient as possible, chasing leaks every single day and getting the vacuum so they get a maximum amount of sap as they can.
Yeah, and that's the lesson we hear from folks like Mark Cannella and others is the keys to success, control your costs and do a good job marketing. So I certainly echo that sentiment. Something else I really wanted to ask you, because this is my favorite part of the Maple News, and I love the Maple News. I read it twice sometimes. Awesome. I really do. I really enjoy reading it. One part I really enjoy are your brutally honest editorials that often highlight your mistakes. And I think we come at Maple from so many different angles, but we come to this same shared experience where we go through a lot of the trials and tribulations that you go through. Is that why you think it's important to share those stories? Is it just something to entertain, or are you telling us something more? Or why do you include those in the Maple News?
Thanks for asking, and thanks for complimenting the Maple News. And well, first of all, when things go wrong, that's actually a lot more interesting to write about. It's a lot, and I can draw more humor out of things that go wrong than I can about things that go right. And it makes it a lot more readable. But I'm just trying to be honest. I think it's the authenticity. I just try to be honest with everything that I'm doing, and I'm coming at it from a unique perspective. I think most people in this industry either grew up in a Maple family or grew up in a Maple community, grew up around Maple. I am not one of those people. I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I grew up on a cul-de-sac. All right? There's hedges, not trees around me. I mean, it was just, so I am coming at it from a total amateur, novice, non-mechanical perspective. And there's so many things that go wrong. It just, I don't know. So, and when those things go wrong, it's like, well, I scorch a pan. That is a lesson learned, and I write about it. I might be the only one in Maple who's ever scorched a back pan, Aaron. I have scorched a flue pan.
I bet you're not the only one.
I don't know. I've scorched a flue pan. Here's another one. I have on the same day. It was my first day of boiling in 2022. It was the very first boil. I was alone in the sugar house. And for some reason, maybe you've had this experience, you've heard other people talk about it, but on the first day, first of all, that's always the day something goes wrong anyway. But what I've noticed on the first days is that is when the most foam will erupt in your evaporator. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I was starting up and I was in a hurry and I was impatient, which is one of my character traits. I'm very impatient. So I'm firing up, just trying to get everything going as fast as I can. And I forgot to add defoamer on my first day. And I had a foam explosion. It just erupted. And it's like a runaway bubble bath. It's like there's nothing you can do. It started exploding out of the back pan. I have a steam away with a window. The window thing was open, and almost all the sap exploded in this enormous eruption. It was like a volcanic thing. It was unbelievable. And I just running around trying to find defoamer, and the regular liquid defoamer I had was all frozen up. So I had a little canister that was maybe 10 years old of this, of the powder stuff. And I just had it, and I never really used it. And I just tore it open, and I dumped the entire canister into this foam, and it didn't do a single thing. It didn't. I just sit there, and I just watch. And there's nothing I could do but watch. And I just hung my head. And all the sap just erupted onto the floor in this enormous puddle. All right. So this is on my first day. So I just kind of had a good cry and then like started back up again and like added more sap and started firing. I'm cruising along again. And then all of a sudden things started going very, very wrong. And I noticed a change in the smell. And I also noticed a change in the sound of the boil in the front pan. And me and you both know it's almost the sound of something is the thing that tells you first that something's wrong. And it was like, instead of like a kind of a rumble, it turned into a gurgle. I don't know. It was just a change in the tone of the boil. And I was like, something's wrong. And then I put my face down to the front pan and I got this kind of blast of burning anneal. Okay. It was like, and all of a sudden the steam was not just that gray steam, but it was like this bluish green kind of steam. I was like, oh boy.
Also known as smoke, right?
Yes, exactly, Aaron. Oh, and so I panicked. I was like, I'm scorching. I at least knew enough to know that I was scorching. And so this is on the same day as the foam explosion. Both of the two worst things that happened on the same day. And so I'm scorching. So of course I throw open the door to the arch. I had a pail of water sitting there, dumped it in there, and it just, just a sizzling mess. And what had happened, Aaron, is I had left a dish rag in my front pan from cleaning it out the previous fall. And the dish rag had blocked like the intake channel from the back pan. And I didn't even see it. I didn't even know it was there. And my levels had gone down precariously, to almost nothing. And I couldn't recover. And it just, it was just a mess. I remember calling my buddy and I told him what happened. And he's like, oh God. And he was like, well, what does it look like now? I said, it resembles a campfire pit. It was just horrible. It was a disaster. But these are the things that go wrong. And so, of course, that made good fodder for my column in the Maple News. I wrote about all of that, actually. And I got a lot of sympathy and a lot of like, yep, that's happened to me. Yep, that's happened to me. Every time I write something about something going wrong, and it's almost every month practically, someone will say to me, yep, that's happened to me.
Yep. And that's pure gold. And I think that's why, because like your comment about hearing the sound change, those are the type of things you learn from experience, usually bad experience, is the changes in the sound, the changes in the smell, things like those cues. But that's why I guess I would advise your readers to pay close attention to those editorials, because you can learn something without having that bad experience of hearing that gurgling sound, or you might be able to catch it early. So I think that's really great that you share that. It's really educational. It's entertaining. So I appreciate your openness with that.
Thank you.
One final thing I'd like to ask you about, on a more serious topic, I guess, is the aging of the maple industry, right? A lot of maple producers are aging. I mean, I guess we're all aging all the time, but we're really moving, and the demographic is really aging. And we put a lot of effort, both at Cornell and the New York State Maple Producers Association as well, puts a lot of effort into fostering the next generation of maple producers and trying to get them motivated and excited in the industry. Is that something you spent any time with? Have you had a chance to interact with young people, write articles for young people, or interviewing young people at the Maple News?
Excellent point. Absolutely agree with you, Aaron. I've noticed that too. And yes, I have. I had in the past couple months, there's a young sugar maker right in West Rupert, part of a kind of a bigger maple family, but he's 12 years old and he built his own sugar house, put in his own evaporator, and had his first season of making syrup by himself this year at 12 years old. Drew Laurie was his name. Yep, he's a great kid. Hardworking kid right in West Rupert, Vermont. We put him right on the front page of the Maple News this spring. I was so excited to see that. Just had someone sent an item from Wisconsin about a young man out there who I think was also 12 years old, but had a school project of making maple candy. He's part of a maple family, but made maple candy in his kitchen, 12 years old. There's a young man in Paulette, Vermont. He is just graduated high school. I believe he's 17. He's up to 5,000 taps already. This kid. Yeah, he's in Paulette, Vermont. He's up to 5,000 taps. And he just graduated this spring, I believe, from high school. So there are young people getting into it. But I don't know if it's the same number of young people getting in as the older people going out. And I've noticed a trend maybe over the past 3 years. We have a classified section in the Maple News, and this has happened so much that we created a whole new category in the classified section: sugar house dispersal. Okay, so older sugar makers, their bodies, this is physical stuff we're doing, and they just like come to an end, of like being able to physically do what they're doing. Although I know lots of 80-something sugar makers and whatnot, there's plenty of people still thriving into their 70s, 80s, even 90s. But there's also quite a few of those people in that same demographic that are going out of maple. And I don't know if that's the same number as the people coming in. It is a little concerning. I agree with you about that trend. You go to maple meetings, maple conferences, you see a lot of white hair, a lot of white beards. It is an aging kind of, or an older demographic. But there are a lot of young women coming into maple, a lot of young couples coming into maple that I've noticed that are really excited about being part of maple and coming up with those same innovations that we've been talking about. And they have the bug just like we all did. And here's another thing, Aaron, I will say this. A lot of during the pandemic, you kind of maybe heard about during the pandemic when all those families were stuck at home, sourdough bread became a thing. People were making sourdough bread and drinking, of course, But another thing they were doing was tapping trees in their backyard. And that became a thing actually during the pandemic. People that are just tapping 10, 12 trees in the backyard and making syrup in the kitchen with their kids. That really became a thing. And hopefully they keep it going and get the bug and add and grow and tap more trees. I suspect that those same people will. There are some signs of hope for sure about the future of maple. I do see that, yes.
And in journalism, do you see young people getting into journalism or agricultural journalism in particular, or is that another need?
Well, so yes, but in different ways, so certainly YouTubers and, the Instagram people and the influencers, there's maple celebrities also. You're one of them with this podcast. This is the kind of stuff. This is maple journalism right here. This is a very popular podcast. I've subscribed since you started like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So
3 years,
yep, yeah. So, and then the YouTubers. So the people like Nikki Boxler, and she's out in Western New York, very, very popular. Scott Dunn in Maine, Nate Bissell in Ohio. There's some really popular YouTubers that are talking about maple online and have a lot of people following them. Huge numbers, surprisingly huge numbers of people following them. So that's a thing that I've noticed too. It's a kind of different form of maple journalism, but it's out there for sure.
Yeah, it's the next wave, right?
No question.
Well, we really appreciate what you do at the Maple News, and it's great to see all this excitement and buzz that gets generated, in large part due to the great journalism you do. So thanks so much for your time, Peter. This was really fascinating, and I learned a lot from talking to you. And I always learn a lot every time I read the Maple News as well. So be well, keep up the good work, and we'll see you out there on the road.
It was super fun chatting with you, Aaron. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that really was an interesting discussion, Aaron. Peter definitely has gained a lot of insights into the maple industry during his time with the Maple News, and he certainly has some interesting stories to share.
Yes, I think there's a lot of merit to having a long-term engaged observer like Peter doing good quality journalism. His background in maple, paired with his vast experience reporting on maple, really puts him in a unique position to produce stories that are useful to sugar makers.
Yeah, I would totally agree, Aaron. It's really neat to have Peter be in the industry for the time period that he has been and be able to visit all these different sugar houses and gain all this experience from around the industry and share that with producers so that, it kind of saves us a little bit from having to travel all across the kind of what we call the Maple Belt. I think as Peter said, from Minnesota to Maine, to visit all these sugar houses, we can kind of live vicariously through Peter's writing in the Maple News. But I think it's also good for people to get out there and visit sugar houses on their own, right?
Yeah, and I've always tried to participate in the maple tours, both at the conferences and the state-sponsored tour in New York State. But like you said, it's a little hard to do all that travel sometimes, and the cost of travel's gone up. Hotel rooms are more expensive, gas is more expensive, there's less time to do those things in some cases. So having Peter out there on the road and sending back really good quality journalism talking about what's happening at these sugar houses, having some good quality imagery in his publication is really helpful. And I appreciate that a lot too.
Yeah, and I think even if it's visiting sugar houses or just talking to producers at meetings or workshops, that, we can learn a lot from producers who have been doing it for many years. Sometimes we come up with great ideas and then you realize, well, somebody already thought about that 20 years ago and tried it and wasn't really effective.
We're definitely guilty of that in the maple industry, trying to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes things that have already been tried, we forget about and try them again. And I think there's two types of learning, right? There's the type of learning where we can put on a workshop and tell people the basic principles of making maple syrup and the best practices and things like that. And that can get you started, but it really doesn't address all the little nuances of maple making that you learn through experience and through mistakes. And that's the other thing that I appreciate about Peter is that he talks about the mistakes people make and we can all learn together from that. It's that peer-to-peer learning. I think that's one of the things that he provides.
Yeah, definitely. It's always interesting reading Peter's editorials to learn about the mistakes he's made. And I think that's helpful that we can learn from them. And I think it's great to be honest. I think we can connect with individuals better of being honest about the mistakes we make. There's no reason to be totally ashamed. The biggest thing is just try not to make the mistake again. And I think the more important thing is if you make a mistake and it affects the quality of your syrup, just making sure that you're not putting that syrup out and trying to pass it off to customers. That's really important if you do make something that's going to impact quality of your syrup.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of a related point is one of the other values that Peter brings to this is that his articles are vetted. So unlike some of the social media content that's out there or some of the online forums, he's an experienced sugar maker and he knows his articles are going to go out in front of other experienced sugar makers. So there's some fact checking and things like that go into it. So it's really helpful to have that peer-to-peer learning kind of filtered through an expert lens and put out here in this format, as opposed to just going online and reading random facts some unknown person might have learned in their own sugar bush. This we know is coming from a pretty good source.
Yeah, and not only from Peter and his writing in the Maple News, but there's also a lot of other industry experts, such as yourself, Aaron, or even myself, who submit articles based on some actual research that has been well designed and planned out. So there's a little bit of credibility coming from experts in the industry that are publishing that.
Yeah, that's right. We publish articles in the Maple News. We publish our research updates, some extension events, some press releases. University of Vermont puts out a lot of articles, Ohio State. So there are a lot of good experts that share their ideas through the Maple News.
Yeah, and I think some of that information that's being put out there too is built upon multiple years, oftentimes, of study. A lot of it's built from at least 2 or 3 years worth of data collection, which is important. Seasonality changes from year to year are so huge that it's important to have multiple years of data collection.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. And there are other sources for those types of articles. There's the Maple Syrup Digest. The New York State Maple Producers Association puts out a really nice newsletter called The Pipeline, and I think other associations also put out newsletters. There's the Cornell Small Farms Quarterly newsletter and so many other good sources of information. So lots of print information out there, lots of good online information out there in addition to the Maple News.
Yeah, definitely. There's lots of resources to check out, various different kind of websites too that are linked to universities such as Cornell University or University of Vermont, or there's also the mapleresearch.org that has a lot of research specific papers. There's lots of great resources out there, and we're lucky, I think, in the industry to have access to all these different resources that are relatively affordable to access.
Yep, agreed. So definitely a lot to learn from the Maple News and these other media sources. If you're not linked in and you're interested in learning more about what's happening in the maple world, go check out those resources. And of course, you can always tune in here for the latest industry updates on Sweet Talk, all things maple.
Thank you for joining us for Sweet Talk, all things maple with Aaron and Adam. Sweet Talk is produced by the Cornell Maple Program and is made possible with funding from the New York State Maple Producers Association and the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. All music is obtained from Blue Dot Sessions. For more information on all things maple, visit cornellmaple.com. Have a sweet day.